וילדו, ויטב אלוהים למילדות, וירב העם, ויעצמו מאוד. Now these are the names of the sons of Israel who came into Egypt with Jacob. Every man came with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. And Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass, that when there befalleth us any war, they also join themselves unto our enemies, and fight against us, and get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramesses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And they were adreaded because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigour, and they made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field, in all their service, wherein they made them serve with rigour. And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, ye shall look upon the birth stool. If it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, Why have you done this thing, and saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as Egyptian women, for they are lively, and delivered ere the midwife come unto them. And God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. The translation's interesting. When it says that the midwife women are not as the Egyptians, for they are lively, the actual translation, the actual word says that they're like animals, they're like beasts of the field who can kind of birth without there being, without help. It's interesting that they use lively. So there we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Please stand. Baruch shenatan Torah. For the Haftarah. Please be seated.
I'll just keep on waiting.
Our Haftarah this morning comes from a time when the people of Judah were still languishing in exile in Babylon. But the prophet Isaiah, who is the mouthpiece of God, is on hand to bring hope and a vision of a better life. So I'll be reading from the book of Isaiah, chapter 27, verses 6 to 13, and you can follow along in the Sancino on page 345. and in the JPSA Tanakh on page 670. So that's chapter 27, beginning verse 6. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim, v'rotzah b'divrechem ha'ne'emarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai, haboher b'torah, uv'Moshe avdo, uv'Yisrael amo, uv'nvi'eh ha'emet v'tzedek.
Amen.
In days to come, the people of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, will take root like a tree, and they will blossom and bud. The earth will be covered with the fruit they produce. Israel has not been punished by God as severely as its enemies, nor lost as many people. God punished his people by sending them into exile. She took them away with a cruel wind from the east. But Israel's sins will be forgiven only when the stones of pagan altars are ground up like chalk, and no more incense altars or symbols of the goddess Asherah are left. The fortified city lies in ruins. It is deserted like an empty wilderness. It has become a pasture for cattle where they can rest and graze. The branches of the trees are withered and broken, and women gather them for firewood. Because the people have understood nothing, God, their Creator, will not pity them or show them any mercy. On that day, from the Euphrates to the Egyptian border, God will gather his people one by one, like someone separating the wheat from the chaff. And when that day comes, a trumpet will be blown to call back from Assyria and Egypt all the Israelites who are in exile there. They will come and worship God in Jerusalem on his sacred hill. Al HaTorah, Va'al HaAvodah, Va'al Hanvi'im, Va'al Yom HaShabbat Hazeh, Shenatata Lanu Adonai Eloheinu, L'Kedusha, L'Mnucha, L'Chavod, U'Latifaret, Al HaKol, Adonai Eloheinu, Anachnu Modim Lach, Nevarachim Atov, Yiborach Shimcha B'fi Kol Chai Tamid, Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Please stand. We're on page 484. 484. Eternal God, whose dominion embraces the universe, we ask your blessing for our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, and all the royal family, for those who govern our country and all who influence the quality of its national life. Make them conscious of their responsibility to teach them to exercise it in accordance with your will. May we all help to fashion in this country a society that excels in freedom and justice, tolerance and compassion, so that it may be a force for righteousness and peace in the life of humanity.
Amen.
Is there anyone who'd like to read the middle blessing?
Eternal God, as you blessed our ancestors in generations past, bless now this congregation, its leaders and its members, and all who enter this synagogue to meet, to study, and to pray. Comfort the sorrowing hearts among us, and heal those in anxiety or pain. May we all find here community and friendship, renewal of purpose and hope, a deeper understanding of our heritage, and a sense of your abiding presence. Bless all congregations of the house of Israel throughout the world. Let those who live under oppressive rule soon be freed, and may we all unite to witness to your truth and to do your will.
Thank you. Is there someone who'd like to read the final blessing?
Eternal God, our rock and redeemer, grant blessing to the state of Israel, created to fulfill an age-old dream and to be a haven for the oppressed. Inspire its leaders and citizens with faithfulness to the aims of its founders, to develop the land for the benefit of all its inhabitants, and to implement prophetic ideals of liberty and justice. May they live in harmony with one another and in peace with their neighbours, and cause to come true once more the ancient vision that out of Zion shall go forth Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem.
Amen. We'll just take a moment to go to page 607. And I'll look around the room and I invite anybody who knows someone who's not well at this time, they say of body or of soul, if you please say their name out loud or in your heart.
My cousin Nikki, her husband Nell, Vivian Lacra, and our friend Lila.
And a long-standing member of the congregation, Robert Gelman.
And Jeanette Schindler.
I'd like to mention my friend Manya.
Eternal God, we thank you for the gift of life and for the healing powers that you have implanted within your creatures. Sustain, we pray, all of these people, our loved ones, through this time of illness. Grant them courage and strength to endure pain and weakness. Teach us how best to help them by our love and care for them and by our own composure. May they and all who are ill know that you are with them, comforting them and reinforcing their will to get well. May their afflictions soon be ended, and may they return in health to family and friends. ויהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, שתשלח מחרה רפואה שלמה, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף, לכל החולים בתוך שעה החולים. ברוך אתה אדוני, רופא החולים. And to page 486, 486. יהללו את שם אדוני כי נשגב שמו לבדו. Page 488, 488. God's teaching is perfect.
Reviving the soul.
God's word is unfailing.
Making wise the simple,
God's precepts are right.
delighting the mind,
God's commandments are clear.
enlightening the eyes,
God's doctrine is pure.
enduring forever,
God's guidance is true.
and altogether just.
Behold, a good doctrine has been given you. Do not forsake it. It is a tree of life to those who hold it fast, and all who cling to it find happiness. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. devotional today. I don't actually have a sermon, but more of like a study session, hopefully not a lecture, because pipe up. In our parasha today, we read about the midwives, the Hebrew midwives, or the midwives that work for the Hebrews. It's unclear what their nationality is. And in Torah or in rabbinic literature in general, women don't always get the best rap. But midwives have a whole different status to other women. They're kind of they're in their own category. And there's lots of thought about why that might be. So they have this kind of leading role in Torah. If it weren't for Shifra and Puah, who we read about today, then Moses wouldn't have survived. And they seem to have this power with Pharaoh as well. Not just with Pharaoh, but also with God. Because, as again we read today, Pharaoh says to them, why didn't you do what I asked you to do? And they answered, they said, because the women are like animals and they've kind of birthed their children before we've even got there. And for Pharaoh, that was okay. He didn't reprimand them in any other way and just kind of sent them back to try and do the work better next time. And it says that they feared God, which is one indication that they might have been Hebrew midwives as opposed to Egyptian midwives to the Hebrews. But then if they're if they're Hebrew midwives to the Hebrews or to the Israelites, then why do they have this relationship with Pharaoh at all? So there's still this conundrum here. So we've got these two midwives. What makes them so special? What gives midwives a special status? Well, there are three names for midwife. One is it's always a tongue twister, as you heard today already. Meyuledet, and that's the one who aids the labour. There's Chochmah, which is the wise one, and there's Chaya, which is from the same root as life. And there's an idea that the midwives might have this special status because they're kind of the ones that are playing the hand of God a little bit here, because in birth you teeter on the edge of life and death, or there is this moment that teeters on the edge of life and death. What's a midwife allowed to do that other women aren't allowed to do, and sometimes even other people aren't allowed to do? So a midwife's allowed to desecrate Shabbat, if, of course, always in aid of life, so doctors are as well. You're allowed to desecrate Shabbat, but not only to desecrate Shabbat in order to make sure a safe birth of the child, but she really can go above and beyond. So, for example, it says, let me just get the right text. In, I think it's Kiddushin 73b. No, it is not, excuse me. Here we go, Shabbat 128b. If the mother is wanting to have some light, they're allowed to light a candle. If she wants to eat particular food, she's allowed to be made the particular food and have it brought to her. If she is not allowed to carry, people aren't allowed to carry, she's allowed to carry it. But it's not just the midwife. The midwife can give the authority for another person to kindle the light for her. So all of a sudden, I guess in this instance, both the midwife and the birthing mother get given this kind of special status because they're in this moment. This is my drash. They're in this moment of bringing life into the world, which is kind of like God's work. There's this moment in our parasha today where it says, Pharaoh says, when the children are on the stone, that's when you should know if they're male or female, and that's when you should decide whether or not to kill them. And there's a thought that might be from an Egyptian story, where there was a belief that the babies were kind of formed from clay and moulded onto stone, and it would be in this stone that their gender would be decided. And so there's this idea that because a woman is, it puts this image for the rabbis of a woman kind of like squatting to birth the child, which again takes back to this image of the women being animals that can birth the child before the midwife comes. And so it's this moment when the child's head is poking out, and lands on the potter's wheel, that it is decided whether the child is male or female. So we've said that the midwives have this ability to do different things on Shabbat. Also, I don't know if you know, but women aren't allowed to be witnesses in a court of law. But the midwife is allowed to be a witness. If there are two men that say no to something and only one midwife that says yes to something, the two men win. She's not that great. But it is unusual that a woman can be a witness. And of course, in the case of twins, it's the midwife who is allowed to have the authority to decide who is a twin or who is not a twin. So, one moment.
Sorry, may I just ask?
Yes, please.
I didn't understand this last remark. The midwife is allowed to say who is the twin and who is not the
Oh,
twin.
sorry, you're so right. That's because it didn't make any sense. So thank you for saying
What did
it.
you
Who's
mean
the
by-
eldest twin? That makes so much more sense, because with the twin, there's still a birthright that goes to the eldest child. So the midwife, thank you so much for stopping me there. So the midwife is allowed to say which is the eldest child, and her authority would be taken even if it's argued by a man. But it's unusual that there would have been men in the room anyway. So the rabbis have trouble with the idea that Shifra and Puah could have been Egyptians. And they also seem to have trouble with the idea that they could even have been separate from kind of the people we know as the key characters in text. And so there are midrash that do try to indicate that Shifra and Puah were Moses' mother herself and Miriam, helping to birth the child. But this is kind of an insecurity that, well, in my opinion, this is an insecurity that the rabbis have. And for me, at least, the Torah text doesn't seem to indicate that they might have been the same characters. But the Midrash kind of say that they are they're Miriam and Yocheved in disguise. So that it does seem, though, so in Avodah Zarah, it does seem that the non-Israelite women can be midwives for Israelite women, and vice versa. And that the Shifra and Puah were celebrated. Again, it's very unusual for women to be celebrated in rabbinic literature, and they were celebrated so much that not only did they kind of say, well, they did this great thing and kept the boys alive, but it says that they kind of did extra to keep them living, if that makes sense. So it wasn't just that they didn't kill them, but it says here in Sota, and they let the boys live. The Tana teaches it wasn't enough that they did not only put them to death, but also filled them with food and water. So they're really celebrated and put on a high status. There are, of course, other stories of midwives and birth in our text. Does anyone know other stories of where the midwives feature? I mean, Shifra and Puah are the most famous, so I'm really putting you on the spot here.
Give us a clue. What was it?
The other two are in Genesis.
Oh, Genesis.
Well, there is an instance of twins being born.
Yeah,
Rebecca,
that's
but
in
I
the
don't
room.
actually remember anybody saying anything about the midwife.
So Tamar was the first. Tamar's twins were the first to be born, and one of the twins gave his hand. It says the text. This is Genesis 38:27 to 29. It was time for her to give birth, and there were twins in her womb. And they weren't the first twins to be born, silly me, but anyway. And during her labour, one of the twins gave his hand, and the midwife took his hand and tied a thread around his hand to say he came out first. So this is our first midwife.
So who are the children in this one?
The children are Tamar's children. I can't remember the names of Tamar's children. Does anyone know?
Perez?
Yes, parents.
Yeah. And I can't remember. Paris is one. Yeah, thank you. I have to check that out now. So that's the second midwife. And the first midwife is with Rachel, when Rachel's having a very hard time in her labour. And it says, the midwife says, do not fear, because your child is also a son. Hallelujah, another boy. That it was her leaving breath, for she was dying, and she called him Ben Oni, and his son called him Benjamin. So these are our first two midwives, and then of course Shiphrah and Puah are the most famous ones. So midwives, when they are working, are really celebrated. But there is this strange thing when, in some texts in Talmud, when a midwife is retired, suddenly she becomes this like mystical witch creature and is no longer such a celebrated person and actually quite a feared person. And I mean, I've got some thoughts about what this might be, but what do you think the difference might be between how a midwife is seen and how a retired midwife is seen? Or why they might be seen differently?
Go away and die when they're not useful enough.
So like what you said, they have a special status as midwives, as witnesses, and so they're quite a powerful figure relative to other women, and yet they're no longer working, so they're no longer tied down. So I can see why they would be threatening, hence that's the witchcraft suggestion. They are powerful relative to their class.
Yeah. And I think it's... Sorry,
sorry to interrupt, but I've also realised, if you're a midwife, you know secrets, powerful secrets, which when you're retired, you've got all this in your head, so you could come out with these secrets anytime you fancy. That's another dangerous side. It's all getting very fascinating.
and possibly, as the rabbi saw it, because the midwives had this power, and now, like you say, they're just these old women that they're just like any old woman now, with less work, but they had this power and they had this knowledge, as you say, and so it makes them threatening. And this power is more than just kind of, they had this higher status, but actually, like I said before, they were playing God's game. They were the ones that had the knowledge about bringing life into the world, which is something that the rabbis themselves didn't have access to. And as, again, midrash, but as men who were kind of very keen on the knowledge and power that they did have, remember in over these 1,000 years of Talmud, of the creation of the Talmud, then these conversations, they're creating their own power, and they're trying to establish a Judaism that puts them at the forefront of it. And then here are these women who aren't working anymore with the power that they have, but they hold the knowledge. So just a little very quick whistle-stop tour, and I'm realising next time maybe I'll bring source sheets, and then I can take, or if I do this again, I'll take people through the text.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can they still be witnesses when they've retired? Do they have that status? Is that gone from them as well?
I think not, but I don't know for sure the answer to that question. Because they seem to kind of really lower in status once they are no longer working as midwives. So I'm going to guess, but go look it up and make sure. But so the whistle-stop tour of midwives, and actually these women that are really celebrated through many texts throughout rabbinic literature, particularly Shiphrah and Puah, but there's still this discomfort about who their identity might be, and really wanting to hold them as one of us rather than being other, and the Egyptians. And I always think that they're kind of like feminist heroes, caregivers, witnesses. They've got this divine status. They have this relationship with God. And Shiphrah and Puah really got away with some civil disobedience without much happening to them. So that's our midwives, or that's our Shiphrah and Puah that we read about today in a whistle-stop tour. I can pass around these. I'll leave these sheets out if anyone wants to have a read through of some of the texts that I've found. What page are we on?
So we've found them. I'm going to do a setting of mine of the Elenu, which in future services I'll bring into the service, and we'll maybe learn it from the actual text. But for now, we'll just sing it as that.
5:20.
She
and we'll continue on page 520, 520. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, אשר סמכתנו לאחד את שמו וגור עלינו לחמש מלכותו. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומשך יקרו לשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזו בגובה מרומי, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס עולתו, כך כתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום בחשבות אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחתינו. And at the bottom of 521, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. Even when they are gone, the departed are with us. They inspire us to live as in their higher moments they themselves sought to live. We remember them now, they remain in our hearts, and they are a continual blessing. And this week we remember Shirley Barder, mother of Yvette Barder and mother of Michelle Barder, Archie Cole, grandfather of Celia Hipgrave, and Jenny Golding, wife of Victor Golding, Harry Wyman, father of Sheila Goldman. We read together the words of the Kaddish on page 524, 524.
יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה, ועמד יברח ירצה וימליך מלכותי, וחי יכול ויום יכול, וחיי כל בית ישראל, עגלה בזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה וברך לעולם אמן מיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפעל ויתרומן ויתנשא, ויתוודע ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי קדושה בריחו. לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה, ושפחתה ונחמתה, דמיירם ואומר ויאמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבנו שמיה, בחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ויאמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, והוא יעשה שלום, עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ועל כל בני אדם, ויאמרו אמן.
Please be seated.
Shabbat Shalom. I'd like to say a massive thank you to Student Rabbi